The metal chair creaked under Commander Vextar's weight as he shifted in the small room. His four eyes looked around the gray walls of the interrogation chamber aboard Haven's rest station. 3 months had passed since the fighting stopped, but the scars on his crystalline shell still hurt when he moved. Lisa Morgan sat across from him, her recording device ready. She was a human war reporter who had covered battles across the galaxy. She had seen many alien species break under pressure, but something about this Zephyrian commander seemed different. His eyes held a look she had never seen before in any soldier, human or alien. "Commander Vextar," Lisa began, her voice steady. "You commanded the 47th Strike Battalion during the invasion of New Austin. Your forces were among the first to land on the human colony world. Can you tell me what you expected to find there?" Vextar's mandibles clicked slowly. He stared at the table between them for a long moment before speaking. "We expected what we always found. Weak resistance, quick surrender. Another world added to the Empire in a matter of days." His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. Lisa noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. She had interviewed many veterans, but alien soldiers rarely showed such clear signs of trauma. "The High Command told us humans were like the Kalari from Proxima 7, Vextar continued. "Soft beings who lived in comfort. They said humans had only fought small wars among themselves. Nothing like what the Empire could bring to bear." Lisa leaned forward. "But that's not what you found, was it?" Vextar's four eyes focused on her with startling intensity. "No, it was not." He began to speak of the first day, when his battalion descended from the sky in their assault pods. The plan was simple, and had worked 17 times before, on 17 different worlds. Land near the largest settlement. Destroy any military resistance, accept the surrender of the local government. Move on to the next target, New Austin's main colony ship had landed near a river valley 60 years ago. The humans had built their first town there and called it Riverside. It had grown into a small city of 50,000 people, with farms stretching out in all directions. Intelligence reports said it had a small police force and maybe a few hundred militia members with basic weapons. "We came down at dawn," Vextar said, his voice growing quieter. 2,000 soldiers in full battle armor. We had plasma cannons, energy shields, and air support. The humans had kinetic rifles and determination. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Zephyrian forces reached the outskirts of Riverside. Instead of civilians fleeing in panic, they found empty streets. Every window had been reinforced. Every doorway had been turned into a firing position. The humans had not run. They had prepared. "Captain Jake Sullivan was their military commander," Vextar continued. "A former human marine who had served in their colonial wars. But the real surprise was Amy Chen. She was just a civilian administrator. But she had organized the entire population for defense." Lisa made notes as Vextar described the first engagement. His battalion had advanced down Main Street, expecting token resistance. Instead, they walked into a killing zone that had been months in the making. The humans had removed sections of the road and filled the holes with explosives, Vextar explained. When our lead squad stepped on the pressure plates, the entire street erupted. But that was just the beginning. From every building, human defenders opened fire. They used hunting rifles, military weapons, and even improvised guns made in local workshops. The Zephyrians had superior armor and shields, but the humans had something the aliens had never encountered before. They fought like every single shot mattered. "We expected them to break and run after we returned fire," Vextar said. "Instead, they dug in deeper. When we destroyed one firing position, 2 more would open up. When we killed one human, 3 more would take their place. The battle for Main Street lasted 6 hours. Vextar's battalion, which had conquered cities in half that time, found themselves pinned down and taking heavy casualties. The humans used tactics the Zephyrians had never seen. They moved through sewers and basements. They appeared behind Zephyrian lines and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Amy Chen coordinated everything from a bunker under the town hall, Vextar continued. She had no military training, but she understood her people. Knew exactly how far each human would go to protect their home. The answer, as Vextar learned, was that they would go all the way. When night fell, the Zephyrians controlled 3 city blocks. They had lost 200 soldiers. The humans had lost twice that number, but they showed no signs of surrender. Instead, they used the darkness to launch counterattacks that drove the aliens back to their landing zone. That first night I called for orbital support, Vexstar admitted. I was ready to level the entire city rather than lose more soldiers. But the High Command refused. They wanted the infrastructure intact. They still believed we could break human resistance with conventional forces. The siege of Riverside stretched from days into weeks. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a battlefield. The humans showed a level of coordination and determination that challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about warfare. Jake Sullivan and his Marines fought like professional soldiers, Vexstar said. But it was the civilians that truly shocked us. Shop owners and farmers fought alongside trained warriors. Children carried ammunition and medical supplies through active fire zones. Elderly humans operated communications equipment from bunkers deep underground. Lisa looked up from her notes. What was the turning point? Vexstar was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There was no turning point. That was the problem. Every day we expected them to break. Every day they got stronger. Human defenders adapted faster than the Zephyrians could respond. They captured alien weapons and learned to use them. They studied Zephyrian tactics and developed counters. Most importantly, they never lost the will to fight. After 3 weeks, we had taken half the city, Vexstar continued. We controlled the government buildings and the main commercial district, but we could not hold what we took. The humans would infiltrate at night and retake positions we thought were secure. The cost in Zephyrian lives was staggering. The battalion that had landed with 2,000 soldiers was down to 800 effective fighters. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Morale was collapsing. I had fought in 12 campaigns before New Austin, Vexstar said, his 4 eyes meeting Lisa's gaze. I had seen species fight for their freedom before. But humans were different. They did not fight to win. They fought because losing was not acceptable. There is a difference, and it changes everything. The interview session ended with Vexstar staring at his hands. Lisa turned off her recording device and waited. Outside the station's windows, stars glittered in the eternal night of space. Somewhere among them was New Austin, still under human control. Tomorrow I will tell you about what happened when the Empire sent reinforcements, Vexstar said finally. When they decided that one human world could not be allowed to resist the might of the Zephyrian Empire, he stood and walked toward the door, his movements careful and deliberate. That was when the real hell began. Lisa Morgan returned to the interrogation room the next day. Commander Vexstar was already waiting, his crystalline shell reflecting the harsh overhead lights. He looked even more tired than before, as if sleeping had brought no rest from his memories. You mentioned reinforcements, Lisa said, setting up her recording device. What happened when the Empire decided to commit more forces to New Austin? Vexstar's mandibles clicked in what Lisa had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a bitter laugh. The High Command could not accept what was happening on your world. General Cricksmith himself arrived with the 12th Assault Legion, 20,000 of our finest soldiers. They came to show the galaxy that the Zephyrian Empire could not be stopped by a single human colony. The reporter leaned back in her chair. She had heard of General Cricksmith during the war. He was known as the Destroyer of Worlds, a Zephyrian commander who had crushed resistance on dozens of planets. His arrival on New Austin had been major news across human space. What was different about the 12th Legion? Lisa asked. Everything, Vexstar replied. They were not regular soldiers like my battalion. They were bred for war, enhanced with combat drugs, trained from hatching to kill without mercy. Cricksmith had used them to break the Talarian resistance. In 6 days, the High Command expected similar results on New Austin. But the humans had not been idle during the 3 months it took for reinforcements to arrive. Colonel Ben Parker had landed with the 3rd Colonial Defense Regiment, bringing professional human military forces to supplement the local militia. More importantly, a man named Carl Johnson had organized the civilian population into something the Zephyrians had never encountered before. Carl Johnson was a human Special Forces soldier who had retired to farm on New Austin, Vexstar explained. But when the war came, he remembered his training. He turned every farmer into a guerrilla fighter. Every barn became an armory. Every field became a battlefield. The expanded conflict began in the crystal mines outside the town of Millfield. The humans had been mining rare crystals there for decades, creating a network of tunnels that stretched for miles underground. When the 12th Legion arrived, they saw the mines as a strategic target that would cut off human industrial capacity. General Cricksmith sent 2 full companies into the mines, Vexstar continued. 800 of our best soldiers. The humans let them go deep into the tunnels before they sprung their trap. Carl Johnson and his irregulars had spent weeks rigging explosives. Throughout the mine system, they knew every tunnel, every chamber, every escape route. When the Zephyrian forces reached the deepest levels, the humans collapsed the main passages behind them. We lost contact with both companies in less than an hour, Vexstar said, his voice growing quiet. A tomb. But they were not content to simply trap our soldiers. They hunted them in the darkness. The surviving Zephyrians found themselves fighting a nightmare war in the cramped tunnels. Human defenders appeared from hidden passages, struck fast, and vanished back into the maze of corridors. The aliens' superior weapons were useless in the tight spaces. Their night vision meant nothing when the humans knew every inch of their underground territory. It took us 6 days to dig out the survivors, Vexstar continued. Soldiers. We recovered 43. Most had not died from explosives or gunfire. They had been killed in hand-to-hand combat in pitch-black tunnels by humans who fought like demons. Lisa made notes as Vexstar described the psychological impact. On the 12th Legion, these were soldiers who had terrorized entire star systems, but they began refusing orders to enter enclosed spaces. Some started having panic attacks when the lights went out. The humans had taken the Empire's most feared warriors and made them afraid of the dark. The next major engagement came at Clearwater Bridge, a key crossing point that both sides needed to control. The bridge stretched across a deep river gorge, with steep cliffs on both sides. Controlling it meant controlling movement between the northern and southern parts of the continent. Colonel Parker sent a single squad to hold the bridge, Vexstar said 12 human soldiers led by Sergeant Nina Rodriguez. General Cricksmith sent an entire company to take it. 400 soldiers against 12. The battle began at dawn and lasted 18 hours. The human squad had positioned themselves in prepared bunkers on the bridge's central span. They had stockpiled ammunition, food, and medical supplies for a long fight. What they did not have was any intention of retreating, as the humans had studied. Our tactics from the fighting in Riverside, Vexstar explained. They knew we preferred direct assaults. They were ready for everything we could throw at them. Wave after wave of Zephyrian soldiers charged the bridge, only to be cut down by precise human fire. The aliens had numerical superiority and better weapons, but the humans had chosen their ground perfectly. The narrow bridge became a killing field where numbers meant nothing. Sergeant Rodriguez was hit in the first hour, Vexstar continued. A plasma bolt took off her left arm. She wrapped the wound, picked up her rifle with her remaining hand, and kept fighting. That set the tone for her entire squad. As the day wore on, the human defenders began running low on ammunition. Instead of retreating, they did something that shocked the Zephyrian observers. They started using alien weapons and equipment from fallen enemies. When their own rifles ran empty, they picked up Zephyrian plasma weapons. When their armor was damaged, they stripped protective gear from alien corpses. By evening, the human defenders looked more like us than like themselves, Vexstar said. They wore our armor, carried our weapons, and fought with a fury that none of our training had prepared us for. The final assault came as darkness fell. General Cricksmith committed his reserves, sending every available soldier in a desperate attempt to overwhelm the human position. The attack succeeded in reaching the bunkers, but at a cost that would haunt the 12th Legion for the rest of the war. When our soldiers finally overran the human position, they found something that broke the spirits of hardened veterans, Vexstar explained. The humans had built their defensive walls from the bodies of our fallen warriors. They had used our own dead as fortifications. The sight of Zephyrian corpses stacked like sandbags, human defenders firing from behind the makeshift barriers, created a psychological wound that never healed. The 12th Legion had taken the bridge, but they had lost more than 600. Soldiers doing it? More importantly, they had lost something fundamental about how they viewed warfare. Nina Rodriguez died in the final assault, Vexstar continued. But she took down 17 of our soldiers with her last magazine. When we found her body, she was still trying to reach for another weapon. The impact of Clearwater Bridge spread throughout the Zephyrian forces like a disease. Soldiers who had never questioned orders began asking why they were fighting. Veterans who had conquered worlds started having nightmares about humans who refused to die. The 12th Legion, which had arrived on New Austin as an unstoppable force, began showing signs of what humans called battle fatigue. General Cricksmith tried to maintain discipline through fear, Vexstar said. He executed soldiers who showed cowardice. He pushed forward with more attacks. But you cannot force soldiers to fight when they have lost the will to kill. The breaking point came during a routine patrol near the human settlement of Pine Ridge. A squad of Zephyrian veterans encountered a group of human children playing in a field. Instead of running, the children picked up weapons and began shooting. The sight of younglings no older than 10 human years fighting with deadly precision shattered something fundamental in the alien soldiers. 3 of my soldiers took their own lives that night, Vexstar said quietly. They could not process what they had seen. The idea that an entire species would arm their young and teach them to fight was beyond our understanding. Lisa looked up from her notes. How did this affect the overall campaign? Vexstar stared at the wall behind her for a long moment. It changed everything. We were no longer fighting a military force. We were fighting a culture that had decided death was preferable to surrender. Every human civilian was a potential soldier. Every human child was a future threat. We could not win a war against an entire species that refused to accept defeat. The session ended with Vexstar describing the growing desperation of the Zephyrian command structure. Orders became increasingly harsh, tactics became more brutal. But nothing could break the human spirit or restore the confidence of the alien soldiers. Tomorrow, I will tell you about Haven City, Vexstar said, as he prepared to leave. About the siege that finally broke the 12th Legion and showed the Empire that humans could not be conquered by conventional means. He paused at the door and looked back at Lisa. It was when we learned that hell has many levels, and humans had only shown us the first. The third day of interviews found Commander Vexstar sitting hunched over in his chair. His 4 eyes were dimmer than before, and Lisa noticed that his hands shook more when he spoke about certain memories. She had covered wars across the galaxy, but she had never seen a veteran so deeply affected by his experiences. Haven City, Lisa said simply, starting her recording device. You mentioned it was where the 12th Legion finally broke. Vexstar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of distress that Lisa had learned to recognize. Haven City was the capital of New Austin. 50,000 human civilians lived there with 8,000 defenders. We surrounded it with 200,000 soldiers. The numbers should have made victory certain. The siege began on a cold morning in autumn. General Cricksmith had gathered every available Zephyrian soldier on the planet for one final assault. The plan was to crush human resistance so completely that news of the victory would prevent other human worlds from attempting similar defiance. City's defense was led by Mayor Helen Roberts, Vexstar continued. She had been a human Navy officer before becoming a civilian leader. Working with her was Colonel Danny Foster of the Colonial Marines. Together, they had turned Haven City into something we had never encountered before. Lisa leaned forward. What made Haven City different from other sieges you had fought? Every other species we conquered understood the concept of surrender, Vexstar explained. When facing impossible odds, they would negotiate. They would seek terms. They would try to save what they could. Humans did none of these things. They prepared to die. The human defenders had spent months preparing for the siege. Every skyscraper had been turned into a fortress with sniper positions on multiple floors. The subway system had been converted into a network of bunkers and supply routes. Most shocking to the Zephyrians, the human civilians had been fully integrated into the defense plan. Helen Roberts had organized the entire population, Vexter said. Shop owners operated communication networks. Teachers ran ammunition supplies. Even human children had specific roles in the city's defense. It was not an army defending a city. It was a city that had become an army. The first week of the siege followed conventional patterns. Zephyrian forces surrounded the city and began bombardment. They expected the humans to request negotiations after a few days of shelling. Instead, the humans used the bombardment to their advantage, collapsing selected buildings to create better defensive positions. Colonel Foster had studied our tactics from previous campaigns, Vextar explained. He knew we preferred to take cities intact for their economic value. He turned that knowledge into a weapon against us. The human defenders began a campaign of controlled destruction that forced the Zephyrians into exactly the kind of fighting that favored the smaller force. They collapsed bridges to channel alien movement into kill zones. They flooded sections of the subway to deny the enemy underground access. They turned the city into a three-dimensional maze where every level held deadly surprises. We lost more soldiers in the first week of Haven City than in the previous 6 months combined, Vextar said quietly. But that was before we encountered the children. Lisa's pen stopped moving. Children. Vextar's 4 eyes focused on something beyond the interrogation room walls. Human parents had armed their young and taught them to fight, we discovered. This during the night assault on Sector 7. Assault had been planned as a surprise attack on what intelligence suggested was a lightly defended residential area. 3 companies of Zephyrian soldiers moved through the darkened streets, expecting to find civilians hiding in their homes. Instead, they walked into an ambush organized and executed by human children. The leader was a human youngster named Kevin Park, Vextar continued. He was 16 years old by human standards, commanded 30 other children, some as young as 12. They fought with weapons that had been modified for their smaller size. The children had prepared their ambush with the same attention to detail that characterized all human military operations. They knew every alley, every rooftop, and every hiding spot in their neighborhood. When the Zephyrian forces entered their territory, the young humans struck with precision that would have impressed professional soldiers. Kevin Park and his group destroyed an entire company that night, Vextar said, his voice barely above a whisper. 300 Zephyrian soldiers killed or wounded by human children who should have been in their beds, not on a battlefield. Psychological impact on the Zephyrian forces was devastating. Soldiers who had conquered multiple star systems found themselves unable to function after encountering armed human youngsters. The idea that an entire species would train their children for war challenged every assumption the aliens had about civilization and conflict. I lost 12 soldiers from my own company that night, Vextar continued, but I lost many more to madness. Seeing human children fight with such determination broke something in my warriors that could never be repaired.
Ow.
For weeks, as the Zephyrian forces found themselves unable to make meaningful progress against the human defenses,
Ow.
Every building they captured came at enormous cost. Every street they controlled required constant vigilance against human counterattacks. The city was consuming alien soldiers faster than reinforcements could arrive. The breaking point for Vextar personally came during the Battle of Memorial Park. The park sat in the center of Haven City and served as a crucial supply depot for the human defenders. General Cricksmith ordered a massive assault to capture it, committing half his remaining forces to the attack. The humans had turned the park into a fortress, Vextar explained. But they had also established a field hospital there under the command of Dr. Susan Wright. She was a civilian doctor who had volunteered to treat wounded from both sides. The battle began at dawn with the largest Zephyrian bombardment of the siege. Plasma cannons and orbital strikes pounded the park for hours before the ground assault began. When the alien soldiers finally advanced, they expected to find nothing but ruins and corpses. Instead, found Dr. Susan Wright still operating her field hospital in a crater that had once been a gazebo. She was treating wounded humans and Zephyrians alike. While artillery shells exploded around her position, her medical team, made up of human volunteers, continued their work even as the battle raged overhead. I watched this human female risk her life to save my wounded soldiers, Vextar said, his voice breaking. She worked without pause while her own people died around her. When shrapnel wounded her, She bandaged herself and continued treating others. The sight of Dr. Wright operating on a Zephyrian soldier while human defenders fought and died to protect her hospitals shattered Vexstar's understanding of warfare. He had seen courage before, but never compassion shown to enemies in the middle of active combat. I ordered my soldiers to protect the hospital, Vexstar admitted. I committed treason against the Empire because I could not bear to see this human doctor harmed while she saved our lives. The Battle of Memorial Park lasted 3 days. When it ended, the Zephyrians had captured the park, but lost 8,000 soldiers doing so. More importantly, they had lost the psychological advantage that had carried them through a century of conquests. After Memorial Park, my soldiers began refusing direct orders, Vexstar explained. They would not fire on human medical facilities, avoided areas where human children might be present. Some started helping wounded humans instead of finishing them off. The siege of Haven City continued for another month, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Zephyrian forces were disintegrating from within, as soldiers lost the will to fight an enemy that showed such complete dedication to both war and compassion. General Cricksmith tried to restore discipline through increasingly harsh measures, Vexstar said. He executed soldiers for cowardice. He threatened entire units with court-martial. But you cannot force broken soldiers to fight effectively. The final straw came when news arrived that other human worlds were successfully resisting Zephyrian attacks. The tactics and strategies developed on New Austin were spreading throughout human space. What had begun as the conquest of a single colony was becoming a war that the Empire could not win. I requested transfer from New Austin after Haven City, Vexstar admitted. I told my superiors that I was no longer fit for combat duty. The truth was that I could no longer bring myself to fight humans who showed such courage and honor even in the face of certain death. Lisa looked up from her notes. But the war continued for several more months. Vexstar nodded slowly. Yes, but it was no longer a war of conquest. It had become a war of survival for the Empire itself. The humans had taught us that some species could not be broken by conventional force. That lesson would soon spread to every world under Zephyrian control. The interview session ended with Vexstar staring at his hands, lost in memories of a war that had changed him forever. Outside the station windows, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the species that lived and died among them. Tomorrow, I will tell you about the final battle, Vexstar said quietly, about Sunset Ridge and the moment when the Empire realized that continuing the war would mean its own destruction. The final interview session took place a week later. Commander Vexstar had requested time to prepare for this last part of his testimony. When Lisa Morgan entered the interrogation room, she found him sitting straighter than before, as if he had made peace with the memories he was about to share. Sunset Ridge, Lisa said, activating her recording device. The battle that ended the war. Vexstar's mandibles clicked once, slowly. The battle that ended the Empire's expansion forever. By the time we reached Sunset Ridge, everything had changed. The war was no longer about conquering New Austin. It had become about whether the Zephyrian Empire could survive contact with humanity. The situation across the galaxy had deteriorated rapidly for the Zephyrians. News of the resistance on New Austin had spread to every world under alien control. Species that had accepted defeat decades ago began questioning whether the Empire was truly invincible. Revolts broke out on 17 different planets as enslaved populations realized that resistance was possible. The High Command was facing a choice, Vexstar explained. It could withdraw from New Austin and admit defeat, or they could escalate the conflict and risk losing everything. They chose escalation. The decision came in the form of the largest military operation in Zephyrian history. Fleet Admiral Zorkith arrived in the New Austin system with 300 warships and 500,000 soldiers. The plan was simple and brutal: completely destroy human resistance through overwhelming force, regardless of the cost. Admiral Zorkith was different from the commanders who had come before, Vexstar said. He had no interest in preserving infrastructure or taking prisoners. He wanted to make New Austin an example that would terrify other species into submission. But the humans had not been idle during the months of fighting. General Patricia Murphy, had arrived from Earth with reinforcements and supplies. More importantly, a civilian leader named Frank Turner had organized the largest volunteer force in human history. Men and women from across human space had come to New Austin to fight. Frank Turner was a factory worker from Earth, Vexstar explained. He had no military training and no political authority. But when he called for volunteers to defend New Austin, 200,000 humans answered. It came from every human world, leaving behind their families and careers to fight people they had never met. The final confrontation took place at Sunset Ridge, a series of hills overlooking the main human spaceport. If the Zephyrians could capture the ridge, it would control access to the planet and could starve the human defenders into submission. If the humans could hold it, they would maintain their supply lines and continue the resistance. The ridge was defended by a mixed force of human regulars and volunteers, Vexstar continued. Professional soldiers fought alongside farmers, teachers, and mechanics. They had been preparing for this battle for months. Admiral Zorkith committed his entire ground force to the assault. 500,000 Zephyrian soldiers advanced on positions held by 50,000 humans. The aliens had orbital support, superior weapons, and numerical superiority that should have guaranteed victory. The battle began at dawn and continued. For 3 days, Vexstar said, but something happened that no one had expected. The humans did not just defend, they attacked. On the second day of fighting, General Murphy and Frank Turner launched a coordinated counterattack that caught the Zephyrian forces completely off guard. Instead of waiting for the aliens to break through their defenses, the humans abandoned their fortified positions and charged directly into the enemy formations. It was madness, Vexstar said, his 4 eyes widening at the memory. Humans in improvised armor carrying weapons they had scavenged from the battlefield ran directly at our most heavily defended positions. They should have been slaughtered. Instead, the human charge broke through 3 separate Zephyrian defensive lines and reached the alien command center. Turner himself led a group of volunteers in an assault on Admiral Zorkith's headquarters, fighting with tools and hunting rifles against soldiers armed with energy weapons. Frank Turner died in that assault, Vexstar said quietly. But before he fell, he had proven something that changed the course of the war. He showed that humans would rather die attacking than live in defeat. The psychological impact of the human counterattack spread through the Zephyrian forces like wildfire. Soldiers who had been told they were fighting a defensive enemy found themselves under assault by humans who seemed to have no fear of death. Units that had never retreated in a century of conquest began falling back in disorder. By the 3rd day, our lines were collapsing, Vexstar admitted. 500,000 soldiers were being routed by 50,000 humans who refused to accept that they were outnumbered. The turning point came when a group of human fighters led by a mechanic named Pete Collins managed to capture a Zephyrian transport ship. Instead of using it to escape, they flew the ship directly into Admiral Zorkith's command vessel, destroying both ships and killing the alien fleet commander. The sight of humans using our own ship as a weapon against us broke something fundamental. In our military structure, Vexstar explained, our soldiers realized that they were not just fighting an enemy, they were fighting a species that treated death as an acceptable price for victory. With Admiral Zorkith dead and their ground forces in retreat, the remaining Zephyrian commanders faced an impossible situation. They could continue the assault and risk losing their entire fleet, or they could withdraw and admit that the Empire could not conquer humanity. The decision was made for us, Vexstar said. Human fighters had captured several of our orbital weapons platforms during the ground battle. They turned our own guns against our ships. The sight of human soldiers operating Zephyrian weapon systems with deadly efficiency was the final blow to alien morale. Ships that had conquered star systems found themselves under attack by an enemy that learned and adapted faster than any species the Empire had ever encountered. The fleet withdrawal began that night, Vexstar continued. But the damage was already done. News of our defeat reached every corner of the galaxy within days. Species that had been enslaved for generations began open revolt. The war officially ended 6 months later, when the Zephyrian High Command agreed to a ceasefire and withdrew from all human territory. But the real end had come at Sunset Ridge. When an empire that had seemed invincible was broken by a species that simply refused to surrender, the empire never recovered, Vexstar admitted. Within 5 years, we had lost control of half our territory. Within 10 years, the empire as we knew it had ceased to exist, all because we made the mistake of trying to conquer a species that valued freedom more than life. Lisa looked up from her notes. Do you think the empire will ever try to expand? Again, Vexstar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of certainty. No. The lesson of New Austin spread throughout the galaxy. Every species now knows that conquest is not inevitable, that resistance is possible, that some battles are worth fighting, regardless of the odds. He stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. But more than that, we learned something about ourselves. We discovered that an empire built on fear cannot survive contact with a species that has no fear. Humans showed us what we had become, and we did not like what we saw. Lisa turned off her recording device. One final question, Commander. If you could go back, would you change anything? Vexstar paused at the door. I would change everything. I would tell the High Command that some species should be left alone, that some worlds are not worth the price of conquest, that there are fates worse than leaving an enemy unconquered. He looked back at her one last time. But most of all, I would tell them that hell is not a place. It is the discovery that you are fighting a war you can never win against an enemy you can never break. Humans taught us that lesson, and it cost us everything. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving Lisa alone with her notes and recordings. Outside the station windows, the stars continued their eternal dance. Somewhere among them was New Austin, still free, still human, still unclored. She began organizing her materials for the story that would soon spread across the galaxy. The testimony of Commander Vexstar would serve as both a warning and an inspiration to every species that dreamed of freedom. The Zephyrian Empire had learned the cost of underestimating humanity. The rest of the galaxy was about to learn the value of hope.